Okay, so now we are at or doing our first video, okay? So the first one would be about coding questions, more specifically problem solving. Okay, so how does it go? So a lot of companies have different ways of doing this. It starts with like if you are like in a startup, not many resources available, things like that. It will start with like basically very kind of subjective system in which you will have different interviewers. They could have like total freedom to ask you anything. They would come with their subjective opinion, and mainly maybe at the end they will collect all interviewers in a room, get like a voting of yes and no. This is like the least efficient way of doing it, and you go through like different places where some companies would have like a specific question bank and a specific ways of grading questions. They call it like a rubric, which is basically like a checklist of things they go over. And you can go all the way until like companies like Google, when they separate people who interview you from people who actually decide whether you'll join or not. And it's like a totally two separate like groups of people and two separate processes to go over. But at the end of the day, regardless of which company, which spectrum, whether they have like a rubric or not, whether like they have their interviewer go through like a lot of training about like confirmation bias and how to be like objective and stuff like that, at the end of the day, they all have one flaw. It could be a strength, but it could also be a flaw, which is a human being is like making the interview or like doing the interview. And because of this factor, and because regardless of how professional you are, what kind of training you got, how smart you are, at the end of the day, you are a human being, which means your brain is full of like a lot of different chemical compounds and things affecting your decisions. You can have a bad day, your mood could be different. There is a lot going inside each of us, which affects the way we hold our interview. So this video would be focusing on that part. So again, regardless of any of those kinds that I talked about, at the end of the day, each interviewer, one of the questions that would come in their head would be like, if they say yes to you and you get hired and you join the company or join the team and you ended up on their team one day, would you be someone that they would be enjoying working with, or you would be someone that they would really not want that? You always want the answer to be the first question, not the second one. Why is this? Because even if they go like check item by check item over that rubric, even in Google, at the end of that rubric, there's still a subjective score of 1 to 4 about how the interviewer see you overall fit within that interview. But at the end of the day, if you think about it from like an actual ROI perspective, the what component is easy to teach. Like, let's say you are having an interview, you don't know much about like trees in data structure. How hard is it to teach you about trees? Or in other words, how much time are you going to be using trees in your day-to-day work? So although it's an important part of the interview, its importance starts to diminish really quickly the further you go in your career. Like if you are an intern, then yeah, the actual data structure would matter a lot. But once you go to like mid-level, senior, staff, principal, all of this, it would become like the least of the worries of the people. Because again, teaching you the what is very easy. Teaching you the how is extremely difficult, because it goes back into your background, your culture. It took a lot of years to basically reach where you are right now. And that's why like in many companies, if you do very badly on like basically the what component, they usually give you a chance maybe to do the interview again in like 6 months, sometimes less. I saw it as low as like 3 months. max like a year. But if you like screw up in the how component, sometimes it can take like 2-3 years to do that. I even saw a lot of people actually failing the what component, doing really good on the how component, and they end up getting hired, although they didn't really answer the question. So what is the how component? Okay, let's actually go through like a problem solving. So if you look at a rubric, like Google rubric, let me basically go through that list because I don't remember it on the top of my head. So if we take like one of the rubrics as an example that's used in a lot of companies like Google, it's not like a one-to-one match, but it will give you like an idea about how things go. So let me walk with you through that kind of like list of things that interviewers go through. So for problem solving, basically some of the questions is like this. Did the candidate fully understand and define the problem before jumping into coding? That's how question, okay? Can the candidate break down the problem into smaller parts and to propose reasonable approaches? That's another how question. Does the candidate design an efficient algorithm and reason about its performance? That's like a mix. So choosing the algorithm itself, understanding the performance, that's a what question. Reasoning about it is another how question. Can the candidate translate their idea into clean, correct, and well-structured code? That's a what question. Does the candidate test their code and reason about its correctness? Again, a mixture between both. Did the candidate communicate their thought process clearly and collaborate effectively? That's 100% how question. How does the candidate react when corrected, challenged, or given hints? Another how question. Does the candidate demonstrate strong reasoning, learning ability, and structural thinking under uncertainty? Again, a how question. So for everything that I talked about here, the what component is like less than 10, maybe 15% of the actual interview. So the how question is extremely important because it defines how you would like basically behave in actual day-to-day work when you join the company. Are you like a team player? Would you actually just go ahead and start working on something although you still not fully understand it, which means that you risk wasting your time and others times when you spend like a month or two working on something which is not really what people are asking for. The damage is really tremendous and it increases with your seniority because your they call it like area of damage or something like that. It increases. So when it comes to problem solving, you can think about like, okay, I got a question, I implemented it, I wrote the code, I basically made or choose like the most efficient way of doing this, but still I got rejected. Why is that? Here is why. So let's say, for example, I gave you a question about maybe sorting some sort of list of data, and you just went ahead and start implementing that. You didn't ask me what kind of data. So, for example, you just assumed that it can be sorted in ascending order or descending order, which is easy to compare, but it could be a complicated data structure that you need a specific equation to determine is item A before item B or not. So that's not what I asked for. It could be even like more than this. I could actually intended to give you a list of numbers and you go ahead and you implement an efficient sorting algorithm and you solve the problem successfully. But again, you were just lucky. It just happened that you thought that you are sorting like basic data types, and I happen to actually mean the same, but you're just lucky. So since your solution was based on your being lucky in your understanding, that doesn't mean that you solved anything. Yes, you got a check mark on choosing the right data structure, writing clean code, having good test cases, but you didn't get a check mark on everything else. So how do you approach something like that? So it starts with the first 5 minutes. You want to build a kind of a relationship with your interviewer so they can basically start connecting with you on a social level. Like we have all worked with a lot of really smart people who are just a bunch of assholes. Like they are really smart, they know what to do, how to do it and everything, but you really don't like working with them. They're just like really annoying people. So you want on that first 5 minutes of introduction to basically break the ice. Very good interviewers usually do this to decrease like the stress factor on the candidate, but most of them don't know how to do that. So you can do this. You can maybe ask about their day, maybe throw like a very light joke, maybe something about yourself that's not in the resume. So try to build that kind of connection in the first 5 minutes, because if you're successfully doing that, you build something that it's like a reverse psychology. So your interviewer already enjoys talking with you, and they could like even give you hints later on without noticing. I will give you a real world example from my own interview in Google, okay, at the end. Once you do this, and once you like break that kind of ice, the interviewer will give you the problem, okay? A lot of people tell you like try to read the problem out loud and think out loud, but it's not really about just reading out loud and thinking about it like out loud. What I tell people, imagine this is not an interview. Imagine that you are having a shared whiteboard exercise with a potential future co-worker. Basically, think about times, whether at school or at your job, when you were working with a colleague about a problem and you were both sharing like a whiteboard, like brainstorming together, things like that. Just treat it the same way. Which means when you are reading the problem, you start again, read it out loud, but you read it as a conversation, which means you can pause, ask questions in the middle, continue, and like engage your interviewer. On one hand, as I said, it will keep that kind of connection, and on the other hand, it will keep your interviewer engaged. Why do you need to keep your interviewer engaged? Because if you start reading without saying anything and start thinking about it without saying anything, there is an awkward 2-3 minutes of silence. Your interviewer, as a human being, their brain would start shifting about other things. You would be thinking about a task they were working on before joining the interview, and they will start thinking about approaches, maybe start thinking about their school day for their kids, maybe other stuff. And the issue is, once you come back and you start talking, it will take them a moment to start connecting again. Like it's called a context switch cost. Who is paying that cost? It's you, because your interview time is fixed. So that's the first step, okay? The second step, a lot of people, when they are given like a problem to solve, they try to find the best approach to start with. This is a completely wrong idea. Why is that? Multiple reasons. First one, you don't know what level of solution you are expected to do. So a problem could have a solution that's brute force, another solution that's like n square, a third solution that's like n, maybe a fourth solution that's log n. And for your specific level, for this specific interview, maybe you are calibrated against the brute force. So now, if you want to do it as log n, good. But are you sure you will be able to do this before the time ends? More importantly, are you sure there is a log n solution? If you are sure and you want to gamble your interview on that kind of judgment call, go ahead. But the idea, it shouldn't be like that. What you can do is on the first 5 minutes, after the initial 5 minutes of introduction, you can think about the easiest way to solve the problem. Brute force, exponential, doesn't really matter. Communicate with your interviewer. Here is a way that I think a problem could be solved. We can do X, Y, Z. And then ask them, should I implement it or should I think about something better? That's the moment you would know how you're calibrated. If they ask you, forget that solution, think about something better, then you know that you are calibrated against the better solution. But at the same time, you would know that you already got one of the check marks, which is providing a basic solution for the problem. If they ask you no, implement it, you would know for a fact that this is the actual calibration bar. So once you implement it correctly and they ask you to think about something better, you are now going above expectation, which means if you are able to successfully even do 50% of this, you are already beyond the success bar for this interview. And that's the first thing to think about. The other part, when you are getting stuck into a problem, the worst thing that you can do is basically saying, oh, I have no idea how to complete forward. Even if you have no idea how to complete forward, just start thinking about all crazy approaches. Think about them loud. Again, why thinking about them loud? As we said earlier, it keeps the interviewer engaged. It helps building that kind of connection. More importantly, when you are thinking about ideas, some of them would sound crazy to you. Some of them could be, oh, this would not work. But when you are thinking out loud and you say like, oh, I have an idea of doing, yeah, but that would not work. If it actually could work, your interviewer would come and say, actually, it would work. Why do you think it would not work? And then you will go into a conversation that is almost guaranteed with you being able to solve the problem. So that's another how, okay? When you are choosing the programming language that you would interview with, a lot of people would just choose something like Python because it's easy to use during interviews. That's an awful choice. Not the Python specifically, but choosing a language that's not your day-to-day language just because it's easier to implement. Why is this? Because when you choose a language, they ask you, choose the language you are most comfortably be able to program with. When you choose any language, doesn't matter, Python, Java, C, whatever, once you choose it, you are telling them this is the best language that you know about. Which means your coding style, the way you write code, the way you structure it, the function naming, all those kind of stuff, it will be judged against the best practices for that specific language. So if you are not really proficient with a specific language and you don't know the best practices and stuff like that, you're basically shooting yourself in the foot. Choose the language that you work with every day, okay? Now you started on the problem. Ask questions. Some people would think like if I asked so many questions, they will think I'm stupid or I'm not capable enough. Actually, if you don't ask enough questions, that's a yellow flag. For senior levels and beyond, that's a red flag, okay? Asking questions is really important. Even if you think you know and understand it fully, come up with a new example, apply what you think you understand and ask them, did I understand it correctly or not, okay? Then, the next step, ask them, should I assume that the input is valid or do you need me to validate it? I would say like over 98% of the people that I interview, whether on a professional capacity or mock interviewing, they always just assume that the input is valid. Who told you that? It could be invalid for any reason. A user could be entering their username and they accidentally press the spacebar. If you like basically accept it as it is, then you either accept usernames that have spaces or your code would break and it would have unexpected output. That's a really easy question to ask. In most cases, I never saw an interview, unless like it's really like an internship or something like that where people don't know much. Most interviewer would tell you like, yeah, assume it is valid and just go from there. They just want you to show them that you understand that you need to validate input. Now you start working on your problem. You came up with the basic solution or whatever good solution. You calculated complexity and stuff like that. They ask you to write some test cases. Again, a lot of people that I worked with would start with edge cases. That's the worst choice. When you are building a piece of software, you want that piece of software to work for 99% of the people that you intended for them to use. Like if you are building a simple calculator that has an add function, you want basically people who want to add 5 plus 5 or minus 6 plus 11. You want it to work for them. So do not start your first test cases with checking for imaginary numbers or adding letters and trying to add them together and see if the code would catch that or not. Because normal users are not intentionally trying to break your software. So if you are building 10 test cases, at least 9 of them should be covering your positive and negative major cases, okay? Edge cases should be the minority, okay? And the way you go through and go after building those test cases need to be happening this way, okay? Now, again, go back like the idea when you are discussing things and stuff like that, keep discussion all the time, okay? Now, when you reach the end of the interview, and not even the end, like in the middle, and this is specifically for senior and above, feel free, instead of asking questions about things, feel free to take decisions. Because part of what seniors and above are being judged for are their ability to take judgment calls even in uncertainty. So try to take decisions, try to scope down your problem, never ever scope up a problem, which means like if I ask you for one feature, don't think that adding 2 extra features would be fun or it would give you positive points. If you are a senior or a staff, that would certainly be like a strike or a red flag, because it means in real life, every time you get like a task or a project, you would just try to increase the scope out of it for no reason. Like if there is like a positive ROI or a business reason, yeah, but if you're just increasing it just because, that's really bad. And the other thing, you are just risking your time. Your time is constant. Adding more features means adding more testing cases, means structuring lengthy code, means increasing maintainability cost, means increasing probably like memory footprint. The list goes over and over for that, okay? So never try to do this. So if you are a senior or above, try to take decisions, try to sometimes even push back. What does this mean? If any of the requirement doesn't make sense to you, in some cases, people would intentionally be doing this to see like if you have the culture of pushing back against things that you believe is wrong or not. To try to push back. If the interviewer really wants you to do it this way, they will answer with, yeah, I know what you mean, but I just want to do it this way. That's fine. Last part of the interview is basically you go through at the end, they ask you, do you have a question or not? I haven't until today see anyone basically marking this as part of the interview itself, but again, it helps building that connection or basically finalizing the build of that connection. Ask them about things that matter to you and also could matter to them. Like what is their day-to-day work like? What kind of technology they use? What kind of technology they would like to use, but they still didn't get a chance to do that? How is the team structure? How is the culture? Things like that. It makes a lot of difference, okay? So that's mainly what you do for problem solving. As I promised, I will give you an example from real life. On my Google interview for my last position at Google, managers basically, we get only one problem solving question. So my problem solving question was something that's basically, I don't remember the exact details, but it's very related to bits manipulation, things related to how they are structured in memory, big Indian, small Indian kind of stuff. And the last time I dealt with that kind of stuff was when I was at school, more than 20 years ago. So at the beginning of the interview, I did exactly as I told you. So I came up with a basic solution and I told the interviewer, I know there is a solution that's basically more toward n, because the one I came with, I think it was n square. I just don't really remember some details about the memory structure related to this. If I was doing this in real life, I would go and read about it, but I don't think we have time to read about it. What happened is that the interview literally ended in about 9 minutes, and the remaining 50 minutes, the interviewer first went to the whiteboard, put the camera on it, and gave me like a quick walkthrough about how things work, basically solving the problem for me, giving me all information about it. And then we spent the last maybe 30 minutes talking about what he does, what kind of challenges he faces. Basically, he was giving me like a presentation. I ended up getting the job. I didn't fail, which means like I didn't really solve the problem, but I successfully passed the interview. What does this tell you? You be the judge for that. See you in the next video.